The steel tip of the surveyor's stake sank into the manicured St. Augustine grass with a soft, final. Derek Cole straightened up, wiping a sheen of sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. The late spring Texas sun was relentless, bleaching the color from the sky and baking the quiet cul-de-sac in a blanket of heat. From this spot, he could see the gentle slope of his backyard as it met the wide, meticulously maintained greenbelt, a common area belonging to the Heritage Grove Homeowners Association. It was perfect. That's the last marker. Mr. Cole, the surveyor, a man named Henderson, with a sun-weathered face and a no-nonsense demeanor, said as he packed away his tripod. 4 foot high, black aluminum, set back 10 feet from the property line, just like you wanted. Well, within city code. Derek nodded, a rare sense of peace settling over him. It had taken him nearly 2 decades of service, of deployments to places that felt a world away from this suburban tranquility, to earn this patch of land. This was the sanctuary he had promised his wife, Simone, and their 2 children, Caleb and Mia. A place with good schools, friendly neighbors, and a backyard safe enough for them to play in. The fence was the final piece of that promise. "Appreciate it, Henderson," Derek said, shaking the man's hand. As Henderson's truck rumbled away, another vehicle, a late-model silver sedan, glided to a silent stop at the curb. The driver's side door opened, and Mark Ridley emerged. Ridley, the president of the Heritage Grove HOA, moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who believed the ground he walked on belonged to him. He was dressed in his uniform of crisp khaki shorts, a pastel polo shirt, and boat shoes without socks. Tucked under his arm was the ever-present leather-bound clipboard. He was not alone. Trailing a step behind him was Barbara Petty, the head of the Architectural Control Committee ACC, a woman whose perpetual expression of mild disapproval seemed etched onto her face. Ridley offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. They were pale, watchful eyes that seemed to catalog every blade of grass, every shingle, every minor imperfection within his domain. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," he said, his voice smooth and affable. "Getting some work done. I see." "Just marking out the line for our fence," Derek replied, keeping his tone neutral. He had learned in his first few months here that any interaction with Ridley was a delicate navigation of unwritten rules. Ridley's gaze drifted from the stakes to the open greenbelt behind Derek's property. "Ah, yes. The fence." He made a small ticking sound with his tongue. "Barbara and I were just reviewing the community's governing documents this morning. Funny how certain things pop out at you." He paused for effect. "We just wanted to make sure your plans respect the community's view corridor easement. It would be a real shame to have to deny them after you've gone to all this trouble." The threat, wrapped in the polite gauze of neighborly concern, was unmistakable. It was public, procedural, and perfectly aimed. Derek felt a familiar tightening in his chest. The old hypervigilance he had worked so hard to leave behind in the desert sands of Afghanistan. "I'll be submitting the application to the ACC today," Derek said, his voice steady. "It meets all the requirements outlined in the CC&Rs I was given at closing." "I'm sure it does," Ridley said, his smile tightening. "We look forward to reviewing it. Have a pleasant day." He and Barbara turned and walked back to the sedan, their synchronized departure feeling more like a tactical withdrawal than a casual farewell. Derek watched them go, the surveyor's stakes suddenly feeling less like the boundary of a future sanctuary and more like the opening markers of a battlefield. Derek Cole was a man who understood structure. The Navy had forged discipline into his very bones over 18 years of service. He had been a SEAL, a specialist in a world where meticulous planning was the only thing separating a successful mission from a catastrophic failure. Now, at 37, he managed an auto repair shop, a job he enjoyed for its tangible problems and solvable solutions. A faulty alternator, a worn brake pad. These were enemies you could see, diagnose, and defeat. An HOA, he was quickly learning, was an entirely different kind of adversary. His family was his anchor. Simone, his wife, was the strategist to his tactician. She was an accountant, a woman who saw the world in spreadsheets and balances, and she possessed a calm logic that perfectly complemented his more visceral instincts. She was the one who had found Heritage Grove, poring over school district ratings and crime statistics until she was convinced it was the perfect place to raise 8-year-old Caleb and 6-year-old Mia. It's a covenant-protected community. Derek, she had told him, her voice filled with the optimism he loved. That's a good thing. It means no one can paint their house purple or leave a broken-down car in their driveway. It protects our property value. He hadn't argued. All he wanted was stability for them. His deployments had been hard on everyone. He'd missed birthdays, school plays, and the simple, irreplaceable moments of his children's lives. This house, this life, was his atonement. It was his chance to build a fortress of normalcy, and the fence was its most critical wall. The greenbelt behind their house was a beautiful, sprawling common area, but it was also an open invitation for strangers, off-leash dogs, and errant golf balls from the nearby course. The fence was for safety, plain and simple. The shared past with Ridley was a ghost Derek couldn't quite grasp. He remembered the name Mark Ridley from his high school in a small town 200 miles away. A quiet, resentful kid who was always on the periphery of things. There was a specific incident, something to do with a science fair, but the details were lost in the fog of years. When Derek had first met Ridley at the neighborhood welcome barbecue, he'd extended a hand. "You know, you look familiar. Did you by any chance go to Northwood High?" Ridley had looked straight through him, his handshake limp and brief. "I don't believe so," he'd said, and immediately changed the subject. The denial was so flat, so absolute, that Derek had assumed he was mistaken. But the surveyor stake encounter had dredged up the memory again. Ridley knew exactly who he was. This wasn't about a view. It was about something else. Something old and buried. That evening, Derek sat at the dining room table, the laptop open to the Heritage Grove online portal. He meticulously filled out the architectural change request form, attaching the surveyor's plat, the fence manufacturer's specifications, and a photo of the proposed materials. He cited the relevant section of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC&Rs, that govern fences, ensuring every detail was perfect. "There," he said to Simone, who was reviewing the family budget beside him. "Submitted. By the book. Let's see him find a problem with that." Simone leaned over, her brow furrowed in concentration. "What's this view corridor easement he mentioned?" "I have no idea," Derek admitted. "It's not in the section on fences. It's not mentioned anywhere in the documents we signed at closing. I think he made it up to intimidate me." 48 hours later, an email landed in his inbox. The subject line was blunt: ACC application, YUS 724C. Denied. Derek's blood ran cold. He clicked it open. The body of the email was brief and coldly formal. "Dear Mr. Cole, this email serves as formal notification that your application for the installation of a rear yard fence on Lot 115 has been denied by the Architectural Control Committee. The denial is based on a violation of CC&R, FAR 8.4.2 view corridors, which prohibits the erection of any structure that may impede the scenic vista of a designated common area. Sincerely, the Heritage Grove ACC." Derek stared at the screen. a low hum of anger building behind his eyes. Scenic vista, he muttered. The view from the street was of his garage door. The view from the greenbelt was of his back patio. He pulled up the PDF of the CCNRs, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He searched for Worker 8.4.2. There it was, a single, vaguely worded sentence buried in a section about common area maintenance. No structure, planting, or other material shall be placed or permitted to remain on any lot which may damage or interfere with any easement for the installation or maintenance of utilities, or which may unreasonably obstruct the view from any other lot or common area, as determined in the sole discretion of the board. Sole discretion of the board, Derek read aloud. Simone looked up from her ledger. That's the poison pill, she said softly. That language gives them the power to interpret the rule however they want. Derek leaned back, the chair groaning under his weight. This was no longer a simple request. It was a challenge. And Mark Ridley, a man from a past he barely remembered, had just made the first move. The war had officially begun. For 2 days, Derek stewed. He read and reread Ferrer 8.4.2, dissecting every word. Unreasonably obstruct, sole discretion. The language was a masterclass in bureaucratic ambiguity, designed to be a weapon. He was a man of action, and the passive injustice of a keyboard denial grated on him. He believed the denial was baseless, a personal whim disguised as a procedural necessity. If he let Ridley win this, it would be the first of many defeats. The flagpole, the trash cans, the kids' laughter. It was all part of a campaign to see how far he could be pushed. I'm not letting him do this, Derek told Simone over breakfast on Saturday morning. He's misusing his authority. The rule is meant to be applied reasonably. And this isn't reasonable. No one else on this street with a fence has been held to this standard. Simone stirred her coffee, her expression cautious. So, what's the plan, Derek? You can't just ignore it. They'll fine you. I'm going to build it, he said, his jaw set. Let them fine me. I'll appeal. I'll take it to a hearing. I'm not backing down from a bully. Be careful, she warned. This isn't a firefight. You can't win by being tougher. You have to be smarter. He knew she was right, but his patience was worn thin. That afternoon, he went to the hardware store and returned with bags of concrete mix, a post hole digger, and a level. He measured the spot for the first corner post, the surveyor's stake a silent witness, with methodical precision. He dug the hole, mixed the concrete, set the 4x4 post, and used the level to ensure it was perfectly plumb. It was a small act of defiance, a single black post standing sentinel in his yard. But it felt like a declaration. The response was faster than he could have imagined. The following Tuesday, the mail carrier handed him a thin green envelope that required his signature, a certified letter from Prestige Community Management, the company that handled the HOA's administrative tasks. Derek's stomach tightened. He knew what it was before he even opened it. Inside, on heavy letterhead, was the notice of violation. Violation, Gervais, 2023-1118. Date May 23, 2023. Property, 121 Arbor Creek Lane. Lot, 115. Owner, Derek Cole. Dear Mr. Cole, an inspection of your property has revealed a violation of the Heritage Grove governing documents. Specifically, construction has commenced on an unapproved structure fence post in your rear yard. Reference: CCNR. Ferger 7.1 Architectural Control. No structure of any kind shall be commenced, erected, or maintained upon the properties until the plans and specifications have been submitted to and approved in writing by the ACC. Corrective action required. You must remove the unapproved structure immediately. Furthermore, pursuant to the board's established fine policy, a fine of $100 is hereby levied. Failure to correct this violation within 14 calendar days of the date of this notice will result in additional fines. You have the right to appeal this violation by requesting a hearing before the Board of Directors. Your request must be submitted in writing within 10 days. The formality of it, the cold, numbered precision, was more infuriating than an open threat. Ridley was using the system exactly as it was designed to grind people down with paperwork and penalties. Derek spent the rest of the day trying to talk to his neighbors. He started with the Wilsons next door. Mr. Wilson, a retiree who spent most of his days gardening, had always been friendly. Derek caught him by his mailbox. "Hey, Jim," Derek started, holding up the notice. "I was wondering if you had any issues with the ACC when you put your fence up." Jim Wilson's friendly demeanor evaporated. He glanced nervously toward Ridley's house down the street. "Oh, that was years ago. Derek, can't hardly remember," he mumbled, quickly grabbing his mail. "Gotta go. The wife's waiting." He scurried inside before Derek could ask another question. It was the same with 3 other neighbors. Polite evasions. A sudden need to take a phone call. An urgent appointment they'd forgotten. The fear was palpable. Ridley didn't just preside over the HOA. He ruled it. His last stop was the home of Mrs. Gable, an elderly widow who lived 2 doors down. She was watering her petunias, her movements slow and deliberate. She listened patiently as Derek explained the situation. Her wrinkled face was etched with sympathy. "Oh, that Mark," she said, her voice a soft whisper. "He gets so particular. He's been president for 5 years now. Nobody dares run against him." She leaned closer, her voice dropping even lower. "He helped me. You know, my roof was leaking last year, and I couldn't afford the special assessment. He had the board defer my payments in exchange for my proxy vote at the annual meetings." The admission hung in the air. Ridley wasn't just a stickler for rules. He was trading favors for power, building a small fiefdom of indebted residents. "You have to be careful, dear," Mrs. Gable warned, patting his arm. "He doesn't like to be challenged." Derek walked home, the violation notice feeling heavier in his hand. He wasn't just fighting Ridley anymore. He was fighting a system of fear and control that his neighbors had quietly accepted as the price of admission to Heritage Grove. That night, he drafted his appeal, his words precise and formal. He would not be intimidated. He would have his hearing. The day after submitting his appeal, Derek received an official notice of hearing. It arrived via email and certified mail, a dual-front assault of bureaucratic formality. The hearing was scheduled for the following Wednesday at 7:00 p.m. in the small, sterile meeting room at the Prestige Community Management Office. The notice cited the relevant HOA bylaws. Article 4, Section 3, Homeowners' Right to be Heard. The battle was moving from his yard to a boardroom. Simone was right. He had to stop thinking like a soldier and start thinking like a lawyer. His first move was to request evidence. He sent a formal email to Prestige Management, citing the section of the Texas Property Code that guarantees homeowners access to an association's books and records. He requested copies of all ACC approvals for fences granted in the last 5 years and the unredacted minutes from the last 12 board meetings. The stonewalling began immediately. An account manager named Cynthia replied with polite, unhelpful efficiency. "Dear Mr. Cole, we have received your request. Please note that fulfilling records requests can take up to 10 business days. Furthermore, certain documents may contain confidential information and will be redacted accordingly to protect homeowner privacy." "They're stalling," Derek said to Simone. showing her the email. The hearing is in 7 days. They're trying to run out the clock so I can't prepare. Then, you have to find another way, she said, her focus unwavering. If they won't give you the information, you have to get it yourself. That's when he called Ethan McGraw. Ethan, his former SEAL team leader, had transitioned to civilian life with unnerving success. He now ran a high-end risk management consultancy in Washington, D.C. His new battlefields were corporate boardrooms and digital networks. But his mindset was the same: gather intelligence, identify weaknesses, and execute with precision. An HOA Ethan's voice crackled with amusement over the phone. Brother, you've survived IEDs and ambushes, and you're going to let a guy with a clipboard take you down. This is different, Derek said, a grimace on his face. He's using the rules as a weapon. It's like trying to fight a ghost. There's no such thing as a ghost, Cole. Just an enemy you haven't properly identified yet, Ethan replied, his tone shifting from friendly banter to tactical analysis. This Ridley guy, he's got a motive beyond some high school grudge: power, money, control. It's always one of the three. Your job is to find it. The records they're hiding are your target. Ethan continued, laying out a plan. They're stalling on the HOA records, so go bigger. Go to the source. Every subdivision starts with a developer who files documents with the county: plats, deeds, easements. It's all public record. If this view corridor is legitimate, it has to be recorded there. If it's not, you've got him. A few days later, a package arrived from Prestige Management. It contained the board meeting minutes Derek had requested, as Cynthia had warned. They were heavily redacted. Entire pages were blacked out, particularly sections dealing with vendor contracts and financial approvals. One recurring redaction caught his eye: every discussion and vote related to the community's landscaping contract was completely obscured. It was a dead end, but also a clue. Why was the landscaping contract so secret? He relayed this to Ethan, who grunted with interest. Landscaping. Big-ticket item for an HOA. Follow the money. Derek. Find out who owns the landscaping company. Public business filings. State Corporation Commission website. It's all out there if you know where to dig. The information war had begun. Derek spent his evenings not in his workshop, but in front of his laptop, navigating the labyrinthine websites of county clerks and state agencies. He felt out of his element, a warrior forced to become a librarian. But with every search, every downloaded document, he felt a growing sense of purpose. He was no longer just reacting to Ridley's attacks. He was hunting for the source of his power. The Harris County Annex was a monument to beige bureaucracy. The air inside was stale with the scent of old paper and weak coffee. Derek felt a familiar frustration creeping in as he navigated the clunky public access terminal, the on-screen cursor blinking with agonizing slowness. Ethan had walked him through the process over the phone, telling him exactly what to look for: the original plat map for the Heritage Grove subdivision, filed in 2004. After 20 minutes of searching, he found it. He paid the $5 fee for a large format certified copy, unrolling the heavy paper on a wide countertop. He scanned the intricate web of property lines, lot numbers, and legal notations. His finger traced the outline of the common area behind his house, then found his own property, lot 115. And then he saw it. Etched in thin, precise lines was a designated easement. It was labeled clearly: Scenic View Corridor Easement, per doc, Joranger 2004, 3881A. The easement ran along the back of a series of lots, a shaded band indicating the restricted area. Derek's heart hammered against his ribs. He followed the band, his finger tracing its path from lot to lot. It covered lot 1 to 12, lot 1 to 13, and Lot 114. It stopped dead at the property line he shared with the Wilsons. His lot, Lot 115, was completely outside the shaded area. The view corridor easement Ridley was using as his weapon did not, and had never, applied to Derek's property. A slow, cold anger spread through him. This wasn't a misinterpretation of a vague rule. This was a deliberate, malicious lie. Ridley knew the easement didn't apply. He had chosen to enforce a rule on Derek that he had no legal authority to enforce, counting on the fact that no one would bother to check the source documents. The motive was now undeniably personal. Derek immediately called Ethan. "You were right," he said, his voice low and tight. "The easement is for the lot next door. My property is clear." "I figured as much," Ethan said, his voice calm. "That's your silver bullet for the hearing. Brother, a certified county plat map is an undisputed legal document. The board can't claim sole discretion over a surveyor's line. You've got him dead to rights on the violation." But Ethan wasn't finished. Now for the motive. He continued, "While you were playing local historian, I did some digging on that landscaping contract." Derek could hear the faint clicking of a keyboard on Ethan's end. The Heritage Grove landscaping contract is held by a company called Evergreen Scapes, LLC, according to state business filings. Evergreen Scapes was registered 2 years ago. The sole managing member, a man named Thomas Albright. "I don't know him," Derek said. "You don't," Ethan confirmed. "But Mark Ridley's wife, Janice, does. Thomas Albright is her brother. It's Ridley's brother-in-law." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "The contract is worth over $100,000 a year." Ethan went on. "I found an unredacted copy of the original bid proposal on a cached page of the management company's server, Sloppy IT Security. The proposal contains a specific clause, added by Ridley, guaranteeing that the common areas will remain unobstructed by fence lines to allow for efficient mowing and maintenance. Specifically, it names the greenbelt behind lots 112 through 116. Derek felt the floor shift beneath him. This wasn't just a personal grudge. It was corruption. Ridley was using the HOA's power to protect a lucrative contract he had steered to his own family. A fence on Derek's property would inconvenience his brother-in-law's mowing crew. And, more importantly, it would set a precedent. If Derek built a fence, others might follow, potentially complicating the cushy arrangement, the redacted minutes, the stonewalling, the lie about the easement. It was all a cover-up for a kickback scheme. "He's not just a bully," Derek said, the words tasting like ash. "He's a crook." "That's the enemy you were looking for," Ethan said. "And now you have the ammunition to take him down. But you have to be smart about how you use it. He's cornered. He's going to get dangerous." Ethan's words were prophetic. Ridley was a cornered animal. And cornered animals don't surrender. They lash out. With the certified plat map and the information about the landscaping contract, Derek felt a surge of confidence. He had the truth on his side. He assumed the hearing would be a simple matter of presenting the evidence. He had underestimated Mark Ridley's capacity for escalation. 2 days before the hearing, Derek was in his front yard replacing a sprinkler head. He saw Ridley walking his golden retriever down the opposite sidewalk. As Ridley drew parallel with Derek's house, he paused, letting the dog sniff at a bush. "Cole," Ridley called out, his voice carrying across the street. "Still planning on wasting the board's time with that hearing?" Derek stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans. He knew this was a test. He kept his voice even. "It's my right to have a hearing, Mark, and I have evidence that shows the violation is invalid." Ridley smirked. "You have nothing. Just a bad attitude. You should know. People like you don't last long in communities like this." The condescension, The smug certainty ignited a spark of anger in Derek. And people like you, who abuse their power for personal gain, eventually get found out. The smirk vanished from Ridley's face, replaced by a flicker of genuine alarm. He had hit a nerve. Ridley yanked on the dog's leash and started walking away, but not before calling over his shoulder, "You just made a big mistake." Derek didn't think much of it until an hour later, when a police cruiser pulled up to his curb. Two officers got out. Derek recognized them instantly from the neighborhood patrols. He knew their names from Ridley's earlier fabricated complaints. Though this was his first direct interaction with them, they were professional, their expressions unreadable. "Mr. Derek Cole," the senior officer asked. "Yes." "We've received a call from one of your neighbors, a Mr. Mark Ridley," the officer said, consulting his notepad. "He claims you made a verbal threat against him just now. Said you were aggressive, and that he felt intimidated. We're here to take a report." Derek's confidence evaporated, replaced by a cold dread. This was the trap. "I did not threaten him," Derek said, his voice tight with the effort of staying calm. He started the conversation. "I told him he was abusing his power. That's it." The officer just nodded. "Writing. So you admit to a verbal confrontation?" "I admit to a conversation," Derek corrected. He was the one who was confrontational. The officer was unmoved. "We have to file a report based on the complaint, since there were no other witnesses and no physical contact. It's a non-criminal matter. You'll be listed as the subject. You'll get a case number in the mail. Have a good day." "Sir?" They got back in their car and drove away. The entire interaction took less than 5 minutes. But the damage was done. Ridley hadn't had him arrested. He had done something far more insidious. He had created an official document, a police report, that painted Derek as an aggressor. It was a piece of paper he could wave in front of the board. The hearing was a kangaroo court. It took place in a small, windowless room with a long table. Ridley sat at the head, flanked by the other 4 board members, who all seemed to be under his spell. A representative from Prestige Management sat in the corner, taking minutes. Derek began by presenting his case calmly and rationally. He unrolled the certified county plat map and laid it on the table. "As you can see," he began, "the view corridor easement cited in the violation notice, FAR 8.4.2, does not apply to my lot, Lot 115. It ends at the property line of Lot 114. Ridley didn't even look at the map. He held up a hand. "That's your interpretation, Mr. Cole. However, if you'll recall another, more important clause in our CC&Rs, FAR 3.1.5, it states that the board has the ultimate authority to interpret and enforce all covenants as it deems necessary for the preservation of community standards. The board interprets the intent of the view corridor rule to apply to the entire Greenbelt area for aesthetic harmony." He had an answer for everything. He was using one piece of the governing documents to nullify another. The other board members nodded in agreement, not one of them looking at Derek's evidence. Then Ridley delivered the finishing blow. "Furthermore, the board has serious concerns about Mr. Cole's increasingly hostile behavior." He pulled out a piece of paper. "This is a copy of a police report filed just 2 days ago. Case number 2388451. Mr. Cole was reported for verbal harassment and intimidation against me." He slid the paper down the table. The board members recoiled as if it were radioactive. He also submitted this photo. Ridley continued, producing a glossy 8x10 print. It was a picture of Derek in his yard, taken from a low angle with a wide-angle lens that distorted his features, making him look larger and more menacing. He was holding a shovel. It was from the day he was replacing the sprinkler head. In the photo, isolated from all context. He looked like he was about to commit an act of violence. The board has a duty to protect this community from aggressive and non-compliant individuals, Ridley concluded, his voice dripping with false solemnity. I move that we uphold the violation, impose the maximum fine of $500 for continued non-compliance, and levy all associated legal fees, bringing the total due to $2,150. Failure to pay will result in the immediate filing of a lien against the property. The vote was unanimous. 4 hands went up alongside Ridley's. Derek sat there, stunned. He had walked in with the truth, with certified documents and irrefutable facts. He had walked out labeled as a threat, his home on the line. The formal intent to lien notice arrived 2 days later, a stark reminder that this was no longer about offense. It was about whether he could keep his home. The annual homeowners meeting was Heritage Grove's biggest event of the year. It was held in the multi-purpose room of the local community center, a cavernous space with beige walls, fluorescent lighting, and the faint, lingering smell of institutional floor cleaner. Tonight, it was packed. Over 100 homeowners sat in neatly arranged rows of folding chairs, clutching their proxy forms and paper ballots. At the front of the room, Mark Ridley stood behind a podium, basking in the spotlight. He was in his element, running the meeting with an iron fist disguised in a velvet glove of parliamentary procedure. Beside him, a large projector screen displayed the meeting agenda. In the top right corner, a digital timer was counting down the 3 minutes allocated for each homeowner during the open forum session. Derek Cole sat in the third row, a slim leather portfolio resting on his lap. Simone sat beside him, her hand resting reassuringly on his arm. She had spent the last week helping him distill months of research and frustration into a presentation that would last exactly 180 seconds. Ethan had coached him via video call every night, honing his delivery, trimming every unnecessary word. This is an intelligence briefing, not a therapy session. Ethan had instructed, facts, evidence, conclusion, hit them hard, hit them fast, and sit down. Derek was number 7 on the speaker list. He watched as the first 6 homeowners approached the microphone to voice their concerns about speeding cars, overflowing recycling bins, and the color of the new petunias at the front entrance. Ridley handled each one with dismissive charm, promising to take it under advisement. Then the moderator called his name. Next speaker, Derek Cole, from 121 Arbor Creek Lane. A murmur went through the crowd. Derek stood, his heart a dull, rhythmic thud against his ribs. He walked to the podium, his steps measured and confident. He placed his portfolio on the lectern and looked out at the sea of faces, his neighbors. Some looked curious, some hostile, some afraid. He saw Mrs. Gable in the back, her hands twisted in her lap. Mr. Cole, you have 3 minutes, Ridley said, his voice laced with condescension. The timer on the screen reset to 3:0 and began to tick down in bright red numbers. Derek ignored him, addressing the room. Good evening. My name is Derek Cole. Many of you know me only as the subject of numerous violation notices and, recently, a police report. Tonight, I'm here to provide the context that the board has chosen to ignore. He took a USB stick from his pocket and inserted it into the laptop connected to the projector. The agenda disappeared, replaced by a high-resolution scan of a page from the CCNRs. 2:45. The board has fined me and is threatening to place a lien on my home for violating CCNR Section 8.4.2 concerning a view corridor easement. He used a laser pointer to highlight the text. The board claims that under Section 3.1.5, they have the sole discretion to interpret this rule as they see fit. I agree. They have the discretion to interpret a rule. What they do not have is the discretion to enforce a rule on a property where it does not legally exist. He clicked to the next slide. The screen filled with the image of the certified county plat map. 150. The room fell silent. Derek's laser pointer traced a thick red line on the screen. This is the official plat map for Heritage Grove, on file with Harris County. This shaded area is the Scenic View Corridor easement. As you can clearly see, it covers lots 112, 113, and 114. It ends here. The red dot of the laser pointer stopped abruptly. At the property line, my home is lot 115. The rule does not apply. This is not an interpretation. It is a legal fact. Gasps rippled through the audience. Ridley, for the first time, looked rattled. His face was pale. This is out of order. This is not the proper forum. I have the floor for another minute and a half, Derek said, his voice cutting through Ridley's protest. He clicked to the next slide. It showed a side-by-side comparison, the heavily redacted board minutes, next to an unredacted email. 110. So why would the board knowingly enforce a rule that doesn't apply? I believe the answer is in the documents they don't want you to see. He pointed to the redacted minutes. This is what we were given. These black boxes hide every discussion about the community's lucrative landscaping contract. This, he said, pointing to the email, is why. The email was from Mark Ridley to his brother-in-law, Thomas Albright. The subject line read, "Contract Terms." The key sentence was highlighted in yellow tom. The board will approve your bid for Evergreenscapes. But a condition of the deal is that the view and access to the greenbelt behind lots 112-116 must remain unobstructed for crew efficiency. No new fences. We'll handle enforcement. An uproar erupted in the room. Shouts of, "What is this? And is this real?" echoed off the walls. Ridley was banging his gavel, but no one was listening. Zurishiro 30. Derek raised his voice over the din. This is not about a view. This is about our president using his position to steer a six-figure contract to his family, and then using our HOA funds and a campaign of harassment to protect his corrupt arrangement. This constitutes a profound breach of fiduciary duty. He took a steadying breath and looked directly at Mrs. Gable. This was the moment for the secondary moral dilemma. He could expose her complicity, or he could protect her. He chose principle over revenge. 0.15. This breach extends to other areas, including the documented practice of waiving fees and assessments for certain homeowners, whom I will refer to only as Resident A and Resident B, in direct exchange for their proxy votes, consolidating power and silencing dissent. He did not name her. He had made his point without destroying a vulnerable, compromised woman. The timer on the screen hit 000. Derek looked back at the crowd, his voice dropping to a calm, resolute tone. My time is up. He closed his portfolio, turned, and walked back to his seat. The room was in absolute chaos. Homeowners were on their feet, shouting at the podium. Ridley stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. His carefully constructed kingdom had crumbled in 180 seconds. Simone squeezed Derek's hand, her eyes shining with tears of pride. He had done it. He had fought like a lawyer, not a soldier. And he had won. The immediate aftermath was a blur of righteous fury. A woman in the front row, a partner at a downtown law firm who had never attended a meeting before, stood and made a formal motion. I move for an immediate, independent, third-party forensic audit of the HOA's financials for the past 5 years, she declared. Second, a dozen voices shouted. Before Ridley could react, another homeowner, a retired Army colonel, made his own motion. I move for a vote of no confidence in President Mark Ridley and call for his immediate censure and removal from the board of directors. Pending the results of the audit. The room erupted in applause. The management company representative, a young man in an ill-fitting suit, looked terrified. He knew his company's contract, approved and managed by Ridley, was now in jeopardy. Within minutes, the remaining 4 board members, seeing the tide turn so violently against their leader, voted unanimously to approve both motions. They looked like hostages who had just been freed. Ridley, stripped of his power in a public spectacle, didn't say another word. He gathered his clipboard and slid out a side door, disappearing into the night. In the days that followed, the community began to heal. The emergency board session resulted in the immediate suspension of Ridley's authority. The forensic audit was launched, and the management company's contract was placed under official review. Neighbors who had once averted their eyes now approached Derek in his driveway, at the grocery store, at the community pool. Some offered handshakes, others apologies. We knew something was wrong, Mr. Wilson from next door admitted, his face filled with shame. We were just too afraid to say anything. Thank you for speaking for all of us. Mrs. Gable caught him by his mailbox one afternoon. Her eyes were wet with tears. Thank you, she whispered, for protecting me. We all get put in tough spots. Mrs. Gable, Derek said gently, what matters is what we do next. He told her about his idea for a new bylaw, creating a formal financial assistance program for seniors on fixed incomes, funded by a small, dedicated portion of the annual budget. It would need a champion, he suggested, someone who understands the need firsthand. A flicker of purpose returned to her eyes. The change was not just procedural, it was cultural. The fear that had blanketed Heritage Grove had lifted, replaced by a sense of shared ownership and a demand for transparency. Weeks later, life in Heritage Grove had found a new, healthier normal. The lien on the Coles property was formally expunged, the fines voided with a letter of apology from the interim board president. Derek, after much persuasion from Simone and his neighbors, had accepted a position on the new, restructured Architectural Control Committee. His first official act was to approve a neighbor's application for a backyard storage shed, a request Ridley had denied 3 times for being aesthetically displeasing. The black aluminum fence now stood proudly in his backyard, a symbol not of defiance, but of hard-won peace. Caleb and Mia's laughter echoed through the yard as they played tag, their safety secured. One afternoon, a certified letter arrived. It wasn't from the HOA. It was from a high-powered law firm. Inside was a letter from Ridley's attorney, threatening a defamation suit and offering a settlement. Derek would sign a non-disclosure agreement and issue a public retraction in exchange for Ridley dropping the matter. Attached to the legal threats, however, was something else. It was a faded, grainy photograph from a high school science fair nearly 2 decades ago. In it, a younger, triumphant Derek stood next to a project on volcanic activity, a baking soda and vinegar volcano that had won first prize. Standing in the background, just out of focus, was a sullen, resentful-looking Mark Ridley, standing next to a nearly identical, less impressive volcano. Tucked into the envelope was a small, handwritten note on a piece of stationery. You stole my project idea. You cost me the Northwood Science Scholarship. I never forgot. Derek stared at the photo, the final piece of the puzzle falling into place. It was so petty, so pathetic, that he almost laughed. A decades-old grudge over a high school science fair had festered into this monstrous abuse of power. He showed it to Simone. He wanted to sue me into silence, he said, shaking his head in disbelief. So what are you going to do? She asked. You could countersue, you'd win. Derek looked out the window at his children playing safely in their yard. He thought of the community, finally free from Ridley's toxic reign. Vengeance wasn't the answer. Building something better was. He threw the lawyer's letter in the trash, instead of calling his own attorney. He sat down at his computer and began drafting a proposal for a new HOA transparency and accountability bylaw, requiring all contracts to be publicly posted and all votes on financial matters to be recorded in a non-redactable format. He had won more than just a fence. He had won a lasting peace for his family and his community, not by destroying his enemy, but by making it impossible for another one like him to ever take root.